and the representation of marginalized groups, potentially leading to further marginalization and human rights violations. The interplay between demographic change, international law, and human rights is intricate and manifest. As we develop into our discussion today, let's remind let's remain mindful of the human stories behind these shifts and the imperative to uphold the rights and dignity of individuals affected by these changes. We have a very learned panel. To start with, I have with me Dr. Balim Mustafa, a Norwegian national of Albanian origin. He is expert on self-determination Cold War self-determinations, mentor of Geneva School of Diplomacy and International Relations. Dr. Mustafa, you have the floor. Oh, yeah, it's okay.
Now I think it's fine. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Excellencies, dear esteemed co-panelists, ladies and gentlemen, the right of self-determination is a fundamental principle of international law. This right is anchored in the UN Charter, Article 1, common to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and confirmed in countless and Security Council resolutions. This right entails the right to determine one's own political destiny and ambitions in accordance with the wishes and aspirations of populations concerned. It represents a manifest of every people's democratic right to self-government and provides an enabling for the promotion and protection of all human rights and related fundamental freedoms. Its timely promotion and realization are a vital conflict prevention strategy. Political tensions within societies, systemic oppression. The historical records prove that the unjust denial of the right of self-determination has been the principal source of many wars since 1945. Therefore, the United Nations and the international community should work for the realization of self-determination in order to address legitimate grievances in a timely fashion and thus strengthen international peace and security. Given its jus cogens and erga omnes status in international law, there is an obligation on the part of states to refrain from actions impeding its realization as contained within provisions set forth in relevant international frameworks. Despite this, the right of self-determination continues to be denied in the 21st century to many rights holders. There are more than 20 active self-determination conflicts, including Jammu, Kashmir, and they can be observed in all continents of the world. I will not go into details regarding the full extent of the Kashmir dispute. However, a brief overview of key developments appears pertinent so as to outline why Kashmir has become to be known as Southeast Asia's fault line, one of the world's most militarized places, hosting more than 700,000 soldiers. The Jammu Kashmir dispute is one of the longest self-determination disputes of modern time. India and Pakistan have fought numerous wars over the contested region. 1947 marked the outbreak of the First Kashmir War, and the issue of Kashmir occupied the agenda of the UN Security Council in 1948. UN Security Council Resolution 47, 1948, called for the holding of quote, free and impartial plebiscite to decide whether the state of Jammu and Kashmir is to accede to India or Pakistan, end quote. Notwithstanding the clear language of this resolution, no plebiscite has been held, and armed conflicts have broken out over the region's attachment to India or Pakistan. Wars fought in 1948, 1965, 1971, as well as in 1999 with the Kargil War, resulting in the death of at least 70,000 civilians. Through the 1972 Simla Agreement, signed between the governments of India and Pakistan, and as upheld in the 1999 Lahore Declaration, glimmers of hope were emerging that the worst may be behind and that a solution to the Kashmir dispute would be in sight. However, this development was reversed by India's decision on 5th August 2019 to revoke Jammu and Kashmir's autonomy status granted under Article 370 of the Indian Constitution, fanning the flames of discontent and annihilation among the people of Kashmir. Although Jammu and Kashmir's regional legislature passed a resolution in November 2020 calling upon the Indian government to restore its previous status, their demand has fallen on deaf ears as India continues to maintain iron hand control over the area. The multiplicity of self-determination and related human rights violations in Jammu and Kashmir has remained on the agenda of a host of institutions and been addressed by journalists, NGOs, and civil society organizations. Last week, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, addressed the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva, stating, quote, concerned by the use of restrictive laws and harassment against human rights defenders and independent journalists, resulting in arbitrary detention and a diminished civic space, including in Kashmir, end quote. In 2018, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights issued the first ever human rights report on Kashmir. A follow-up report was issued a year later. The reports detailed violations of human rights prevalent in Jammu and Kashmir, including lack of access to justice and a culture of impunity, excessive use of force, arbitrary arrest and detention, even of children, and forced disappearances and sexual violence. This echoes countless reports, documentaries, and media reports about the transgressions and wrongful acts inflicted upon the public by the Indian authorities. Pursuant to the Public Safety Act, Jammu and Kashmir is often under curfew and arbitrary detentions are frequent. It has likewise been reported that more than 8,000 people have disappeared, 4 times as many as in Augusto Pinochet's Chile. According to different NGOs, 50% of civilians live in distress. According to the Association of Parents of Disappeared Persons and Jammu and Kashmir Coalition of Civil Society, 3/4 of torture victims are civilians. Doctors Without Borders, 19% of Kashmiri population suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder. Moreover, the International Federation for Human Rights documented widespread human rights violations and related practices that risk causing significant alterations to Jammu and Kashmir's social, religious, demographic composition, quote, with severe ramifications for the socio-economic and political rights of Kashmiris, end quote. Legal changes have recently been introduced by the central authorities aimed at easing restrictions on non-Kashmiris to become permanent residents and to encourage the of Indian citizens into the region. The criteria for Indian citizens to become permanent residents of Jammu and Kashmir have been expanded, rendering non-Kashmiris eligible to purchase land, employment, and exercise electoral rights in the region. Cases of forced evictions, demolitions, and land grabs in Jammu and Kashmir were likewise reported. It is important to emphasize that such practices and conducts are incompatible with international law and violate practices and customs pertaining to the treatment of civilian populations in areas of armed conflict. Demographic manipulations constitute a frontal attack on the concepts of democracy and self-determination. With respect to the demographic alteration of Jammu and Kashmir, it is useful to recall the language of the 2004 International Court of Justice Advisory Opinion on the legal construction of a wall. Actions taken by Israel, the occupying power, to change the status and demographic composition of occupied East Jerusalem have no legal validity and are null void, end quote. Similar views were likewise upheld in the 2024 ICJ Advisory Opinion on the occupied Palestinian territory and by the UN Security Council in numerous resolutions. Article 49, paragraph 6 of the Fourth Geneva Convention of 1949 stipulates that, quote, the occupying power should not deport or transfer parts of its own civilian population into the territory it occupies, end quote. This is reaffirmed in Article 85, paragraph 4 of Additional Protocol 1, which furthermore considers such violations to, quote, be regarded as war crimes, end quote. The Rome Statutes, Article 7 and 8 on the International Criminal Court likewise defines deportation, forcible transfer of population, and implantation of settlers as war crimes. Policies and practices aimed at altering the demographics of a populated area has been recognized as a crime against humanity, not only by the ICC, but already in the judgments of the Nuremberg and Tokyo tribunals, and in the statutes of the International Criminal Tribunal for the Yugoslavia and Rwanda. Such transgressions and wrongful acts violate many articles of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Property laws in Kashmir must not be used to alter the region's demography, but instead to protect and safeguard the social, cultural, and religious composition and heritage of its inhabitants. The governing principle for the settlement of Kashmiri disputes remains the right of self-determination. 78 years have elapsed since Jammu Kashmir entered the agenda of the UN. The dispute is a legacy of the partition that accompanied Britain's withdrawal from India in 1947 and constitutes an unfulfilled promise for the people of Kashmir to manifest their right to self-determination. India must commit to a process enabling the people of Jammu Kashmir to genuinely exercise its right to self-determination in accordance with the wishes and aspirations of its people and Security Council Resolution 47. Attempts to alter the social, religious, cultural demographics of Kashmir are contrary to peace and stability in the region. The alienation and persistent resentment of the Kashmiri population will engender further civil unrest and political instability. Therefore, it is important that the UN plays a mediation role in facilitating a process conducive to the settlement of Kashmir's political status. As we are reminded in Chapter 6 of the UN Charter, it remains the duty of the UN and its member states to actively work towards the peaceful settlement of protracted conflicts in such a manner that international peace, security, and justice are not endangered. In conclusion, I would like to share a quote by Rice, former UN independent expert and professor of international law at the Geneva School of Diplomacy, who has stated that, quote, states have the sacred duty to ensure peace, while individuals human to peace. I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mustafa, for bringing the historical context of Kashmir, the human rights interplay, as well as the legal perspective and international law surrounding the dispute of Kashmir and people's right to self-determination. Thank you very much. My next speaker will be Kashmiri, a person who is from the Indian-occupied Kashmir, whose whole life has been in for the struggle for the people's rights to self-determination. I mean, Ghulam Muhammad Safi is convener of All Parties Hurriyat Conference, an umbrella organization of Kashmiri political, religious organizations struggling for the right to self-determination of people of Kashmir. Mr. Safi, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. My whole life is deeply rooted in the struggle for the rights and dignity of the people of Kashmir. I feel compelled to address the pressing issue of demographic changes in our region and their profound implications for our human rights. The landscape of Kashmir is not merely a geographical entity. It is a tapestry woven from the threads of our history, culture, and identity. However, this tapestry is under threat from demographic shifts that have the potential to reshape our society and compromise our fundamental rights. Demographic changes refer to the alterations in the composition of a population, including factors such as age, race, gender, and geographical distribution. In the context of Indian occupied Kashmir, we have witnessed significant shifts due to various factors, including migration, military presence, and political policies. These changes are not just statistical, they resonate deeply within our communities and affect our collective identity. The ongoing demographic shifts in Kashmir have led to increased interactions between different communities, but the outcomes have often been troubling. The fear of cultural assimilation looms large as dominant narratives attempt to overshadow our rich Kashmiri heritage. The imposition of external cultural norms often threatens to erase our unique identity, leading to a homogenization of our diverse traditions and values. Conversely, the potential for cultural pluralism exists, where various identities coexist and contribute to a richer social fabric. However, this potential is frequently undermined by systemic efforts to marginalize our voices. Struggle for recognition of our distinct cultural identity is at the heart of our fight for freedom and justice. Demographic change influence the values and norms that govern our society. The aging of our population, coupled with the youth exodus in search of better opportunity, has led to a disconnect between generations. The priorities of the younger generation, who are increasingly aware of global human rights standards, clash with the traditional values that have long defined our society. This generational gap complicates our struggle as we navigate the complexities of maintaining our cultural integrity while striving for progress and justice. The human rights situation in Kashmir is dire, characterized by widespread violations, including extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances, and restrictions on freedom of expression. These abuses are exacerbated by demographic changes that serve to further entrench the power of the state over our lives. The influx of occupational forces and settlers alters the demographic balance, leading to a sense of alienation and disenfranchisement among the indigenous population. Our struggle for self-determination is intrinsically linked to the preservation of our demographic integrity. The right to maintain our identity and culture is fundamental to our human rights. As we witness the erosion of our community through policies aimed at altering our demographic makeup, we must remain vigilant and resilient in our fight for justice. The changing demographics of Kashmir profoundly affect the identity formation of our youth. Growing up in a society marked by conflict, militarization, and demographic manipulation, our children face unique challenges in understanding their place in the world. The sense of belonging is increasingly threatened, leading to a crisis of identity that can have lasting repercussions on future generations. The struggle for our rights in Kashmir is multifaceted. It encompasses the fight against demographic manipulation, the preservation of our cultural identity, and the demand for justice and accountability. I urge you all and international community at large, unite in our efforts to resist the forces that seek to dilute our identity and undermine our rights. The future of Kashmir lies in our hands, And it's our collective responsibility to ensure that our voices are heard, our rights are protected, and our identity is preserved. In this struggle, we draw strength from our history, our culture, and our unwavering commitment to justice. Together, we will continue to fight for a Kashmir that honors its diverse heritage and upholds the rights of all its people. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Safi. Mr. Safi brought in the what's happening currently in Kashmir, though in short, but the man from the ground and in whose blood Kashmir runs has to say much, but this forum has a limited time and some limitations to express ourselves. Thank you, Safi Saab. Now I will move to another expert, is Professor Dr. Joseph Ronca. Is he present?
Yes.
Yes.
Joseph Ronca is author of Human Rights and Social Justice, Social Action, and Serving for Health and Health Personnels. He is representative of United Nations United Nations at New York of International Association of Schools. Professor Joseph Ronca is a good friend of ours, a very old guard on human rights. Professor Joseph Ronca, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Altif. Pleasure to be here. So I will talk about demographic changes and human rights in conflict situations. According to the New York Times, roughly 90% of casualties in modern-day warfare are civilians. But while the human condition is such that it's horrified to see innocent victims killed in such wars and skirmishes as now being waged in areas like Gaza, Ukraine, Syria, Ethiopia, and Kashmir, I'm also reminded of the words of Pope Francis, now in health. His death will be a loss to humanity, I think, who, when addressing the United States Congress, said, "When economic and social arrangements are unjust, human rights are violated." Thus, while war naturally repels us, as we see in the media, injured victims screaming on the precipice of death being pulled from rubble, there are also such injustices like extreme poverty, the world's most pitiless killer, according to UNICEF, whose victims may not be as readily apparent with their cries for help, but who nevertheless experience undue hardship, to say the least. We may not see them screeching from terror in bombed-out buildings, but they are those who are homeless, the hungry, the thirsty, the wrongfully imprisoned, those who disappear in the night, who are victims of accumulated indignities, to borrow a phrase from Martin Luther King, whose human needs, the victim's human needs and human rights, which is the legal mandate to fulfill human needs, are frustrated. Now, when human needs are frustrated, according to the scholar on violence, Erich Fromm, author of The Art of Loving, it would lead to destruction, aka also known as war. I would go so far as to say, therefore, that we need to tackle the economic and social injustices that Pope Francis talked about, so human needs, thus human rights, are not frustrated, which can lead to destruction, war. While it is important and necessary to get war's victims out of the debris, nevertheless, as Noam Chomsky has said, whenever there is violence, there is a problem that is not being addressed. So let me say a few words about some of the problems that I think may not be addressed that lead to war throughout the world and are consistent with themes of this side event on demographics and conflict situations. So before discussing what we can do to change such unjust economic and social arrangements, I would like to look at some demographics and refer here to Article 2 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a document increasingly referred to as customary international law, which all governments, and let me add, NGOs, ought to follow. Article 2 of the Universal Declaration of Rights, which has been called the Non-Discrimination Clause, because it says that in essence, every person everywhere has human rights without distinctions such as race, color, language, sex, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. And other status could mean sexual orientation, age, medical condition. Let us also keep in mind, while we're talking about demographics here, that demographics comes from the Greek word demos, which originally meant house and land, but later it has become to be associated with themes of democracy, community, collective identity, and I would say family. Nobody, for instance, really wants to live in a house or on a land. They want to live in a home. They want to be close to loved ones. We should all love one another. In essence, a community, or what Martin Luther King has called the beloved community. So that is our aim, a global beloved community. For the sake of time, I will discuss those accidental characteristics in an Aristotelian sense, that they're peripheral to the human condition. Looking at ways that throughout the world we might discriminate and then make a select point, some statistical and some qualitative, which are also somewhat arbitrary, but I think are important for a best debate. So looking at Article 2, let's start off with how we discriminate on the basis of race. According to the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, racial discrimination is one of the most common grounds for discrimination worldwide. According to the Pew Research Center, people on the ideological left are more prone to see race as a problem. Roughly 42% from the left in the United States of America, which has the greatest ideological divide here in my country. Sorry, we withdrew from the Human Rights Council. I don't know what's going on. Roughly 52% from the left see race as an issue, and 15% from the right do not see it as an issue. Let's look now at sex or gender, same difference, I would say. Women, who are roughly 51% of the world's population, comprise roughly 68% of the world's illiterate. They own 2% roughly of the world's property and earn considerably less than men. In the USA, as a case in point, they earn 80 cents to every dollar a man makes. I'm going to have to speak rather quickly. I have a page and a half left. Let me talk rather quickly. Hope you'll be able to follow me. And when we talk about languages, I would like to draw your attention to this International Decade of Indigenous Peoples, which ends in 2032. Globally, one language is lost every 2 weeks, the highest number being in indigenous communities. This loss seems to have severe deleterious effects in terms of things like employment and supporting one's family, that is living becomingly. And it also has effects on self-esteem, let alone the loss of wisdom of centuries of indigenous culture. Regarding religion, how do we discriminate? I recall the words of former President Bush, who spoke of the war in Iraq as a crusade. He had since apologized. I recall a photo in the New York Times where French police were ordering Muslim women to take off their hijabs while at the beach. Prime Minister Netanyahu referred to the war in Gaza as a holy war. I find that all rather strange, for as the Dalai Lama said, compassion is the basis of all religions. Regarding political opinion, there seems to be a global shift toward the right, as evidenced in part by Modi in India, who I think has exacerbated the conflicts in Kashmir due to Poland and Trump in the USA. Trump, in his recent address to the nation, condemned wokeness, which can be seen as a commitment to human rights and social justice. He referred to the radical left as lunatics, and he has just suspended funding to the Fulbright program, of which I'm an alumnus, and I went to Pakistan also. which was fascinating. That's for another time. Let us also keep in mind that the world illiteracy rate has very much risen in the last decade, particularly since 2019, since the start of COVID. Presently in the United States, 54% of Americans do not read above the sixth grade level, according to the United States Literacy Project. And throughout the world, illiteracy has grown. I don't know, take it for what it's worth. Might be why it's so rightist. I don't know. Now, looking at national or social origin, the refugee crisis is well known. It's tripled in the last decade, with roughly 44 million refugees in 25 facing violence, rape, and economic exploitation. Discrimination based on property, one could say wealth, therefore, is obvious. That according to Oxfam, 1% of the world's wealthiest own 95% of the world's wealth. Could you believe this? Let us keep in mind that rights are interdependent, and such a maldistribution of wealth is antithetical to Article 28 of the Universal Declaration, which calls for a socially just international order. In each of the above instances, we can see how ultimately human needs can be frustrated, thus erupting in violence, in the worst instance, war. Violence, of course, is not condonable, but could possibly be understood from a human rights perspective as violations in part of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. What then shall we do, as stated in Matthew chapter 3, verse 10? The good book, or I should say more accurately, one of the good books of the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition. In brief, this is what we should do. I don't really think it's rocket science. We need a human rights culture. That is, a lived awareness of human rights principles in our minds and our hearts, and integrated into our everyday lives, which would later be reflected in socially just policies. We're talking about values here, and they need to be inculcated at an early age. I ask you, why are our history books divided into chapters on revolutions and wars, at least in the United States? I don't know. There's World War I, World War II, the Persian War, and so on. We seem to be socializing our children into accepting violence as a given. Only chosen values endure, and once values are adopted, it is almost impossible to change them. We need to teach in our schools and in the media human rights principles in ways that children understand. I understand that in some countries like Norway, they discuss an article from the rights of the child, that every child, for example, has a right to nutritious food, and then have a brief discussion. This is between cartoons, let's say. I'm convinced that if we taught human rights principles at an early age, which would consist of not demonizing others, based on such accidental characteristics that I just discussed in Article 2 of the Universal Declaration, maybe war could be eradicated completely. Information is power, and the world must know about all human rights instruments which reflect the wisdom of the international community. But for the moment, unfortunately, we have war now, and skirmishes, call them whatever, and I urge all countries and NGOs to put in their constitutions humanitarian disaster relief is a human right, which echoes Article 28, calling for a just international order. All of humanity must come to the aid of those on the verge of being buried alive in bombed out buildings, and the hunger, thirst, and famine endemic and substantive to so many conflict situations. And that relief must also continue after the war in terms of continuing health care, both physical and mental. Mental health is important. As a case in point, in the USA, believe it or not, roughly 22 veterans die of suicide each day. I know, Altaf, you had attended there was a conference on mental health, and maybe we could talk about that. Okay, thank you for listening. I'm sorry to leave you with such gruesome thoughts, but I am convinced that ultimately the human condition is moved to altruism in times of crisis. And we need to capitalize, for lack of a better word, on that aspect of the human condition. We need to let the world see these crises firsthand, and it can move them to altruism, I hope. Let me conclude with the words of Nelson Mandela, who said that the greatest weapon that we have is that we sit down and talk with each other. Let us continue then to engage in dialogue, peace through dialogue, you say, with all oppressed groups, some that I've enumerated above. In this global dialogue, let's talk with each other as Indians, Kashmiri, let Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis, Christian nationalists, Orthodox Jews, let us all talk together, and let us remember that if you are not at the table of discussion, you're on the menu. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your time. Next.
Thank you, Professor Ronka, for your thoughtful intervention, as you have always been, as an expert of international law and on human rights. You always appeal to the people to sit down and to negotiate on the things instead of creating violence and conflicts around the globe. Thank you very much. Now, my fourth speaker will be Professor Dr. Shugufta Ashraf. Dr. Shugufta Ashraf is a very senior human rights activist and also teaches public policy at the University of Portland, Azad Jammu Kashmir. Dr. Shugufta, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. It doesn't work. Doesn't work.
You can move to Robert, please. Yeah.
Yes, it works. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen, for sparing your time to come over and to listen to the most important and burning topic of the new world, these demographic shifts. Ladies and gentlemen, demographic changes in conflict zones are not just statistical shifts. They significantly impact human rights and global stability at large. Forced displacements, ethnic cleansing, and resettlement politics can transform population dynamics, affecting access to resources, political representation, and cultural identity. These changes often deepen divisions, fuel tensions, and prolong conflicts. Prime example is the Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, where demographic shifts have become a tool of war and repression, violating international human rights norms. Demographic changes in conflict zones are often imposed through violent or coercive measures, such as forced displacement, which leaves millions vulnerable to human rights violations. Refugees and displaced persons face loss of access to basic rights, including healthcare and education, and are frequently denied the right to return to their homes. When these displacements are part of ethnic cleansing or forced population transfers, they serve as tools to alter the political landscape of the region. Demographic engineering in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir disrupts the balance of power, causing local population to lose political rights, cultural protection, and economic resources. In many cases, newly settled or displaced populations are excluded from vital resources like water, food, employment, and empowerment. This exclusion leads to social inequalities and resentment, further deepening conflicts and making peace-building efforts nearly impossible. Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir exemplifies the destructive potential of demographic changes. The region has been a hotspot of territorial and political conflict between India and Pakistan. Recent policies, like the revocation of Article 317 2019, which Kashmir of its special autonomy, and settlement schemes for non-Kashmiri Hindus, have altered the region's population composition. These policies are viewed as attempts to dilute the Muslim majority character of the area, violating the human rights of indigenous Kashmiri people and infringing upon international human rights norms. Such demographic changes threatens the cultural identity of Kashmiris and undermine their right to self-determination. The imposition of settlement policies erodes the region's distinct cultural heritage, language, and the way of life. The international community must address these issues as demographic engineering in conflict zones challenges global human rights frameworks, undermine peace buildings, and violates fundamental human rights. The consequences of demographic changes in conflict zones, such as Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, are not just local or national, but have broader international implications. They challenge the integrity of human rights frameworks, violate international legal standards, and complicate peace-building efforts. The situation in Jammu and Kashmir is emblematic, is used as an instrument of oppression, stripping communities of their right to determine their own future. It also highlights the urgent need for international bodies to enhance human rights protections and intervene as demographic manipulation occurs in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and ensuring that Kashmiris are not subjected to the policies that violate their fundamental human rights. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, demographic changes in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir are much more than a demographic shift. They represent a profound and often tragic reshaping of lives and rights. The consequences are dire, especially when such changes are driven by political or military motives that disregards the inherent dignity and rights of local population. The situation in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir serves as a stark reminder of the dangers posed by the demographic engineering and the urgent need for stronger international human rights protection in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. It is the time, ladies and gentlemen, for the international community to step up its efforts to defend human rights in the face of such manipulations and to support the rights of Kashmiri people to live in peace and security, which is only possible through the resolution of Jammu and Kashmir dispute through implementation of UN resolutions on Jammu and Kashmir. With this, I thank you all.
Thank you, Professor Shagufta, for your intervention. Now I have last speaker, or your friend, Ms. Shabnam, a human rights activist, and also she's advisor and works as a human rights in Baku University from Azerbaijan. Ms. Shabnam, you have the floor.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, distinguished organizers. I thank you for giving me floor, for sharing one of the painful pages of my country. I stand before you today to speak about a grave human rights violation, one that, despite the passage of time, remains unresolved and deeply painful for thousands of families. I'm speaking about the forced deportation of ethnic Azerbaijanis from Armenia in the late 1980s and 1990s. This tragic event did not just erase a population from their homeland, it also erased their culture, heritage, and their sacred places. Mosques were destroyed, cemeteries were desecrated, and the centuries-old Azerbaijani presence in Armenia was violently uprooted. But let me be clear. Despite the suffering and injustice, we do not seek revenge. Our goal is peaceful return. We don't threaten Armenia's territorial integrity or sovereignty. We only achieve for what is rightfully ours, the right to go back to our homes, to live in peace, and to coexist as neighbors. Unfortunately, instead of engaging in meaningful dialogue, the Armenian state continues to spread misinformation, denying the rights of those who were forcibly expelled. But this is not a political issue, it is a human rights issue. The passage of 30 years does not diminish the pain of the displaced. Time does not erase injustice, nor does the problem erase itself. The right to return is a fundamental principle in international law, and we call upon the global community to support us in this just cause. It is deeply troubling that a recent video from 1993 featuring former Armenian President Levon Ter-Petrosyan has been released, in which he refers to the forced deportation of Azerbaijanis as a success of Armenia. Let us be clear, ethnic cleansing can never be considered as a success. It is a stain on history, and justice demands that we acknowledge and rectify it. We are ready for dialogue, but on the contrary, Armenia refuses to engage in dialogue with us. We are ready for peace, but peace can only be built on justice. We urge Armenia to recognize the rights of Azerbaijani deportees and to take genuine steps toward reconciliation. And we call upon the international community to support our rightful cause. And I would also like to express my deepest concern about the deep hatred in Armenian society towards Azerbaijan. This issue should be closely monitored by the relevant intergovernmental organizations, including UN treaty bodies. The right to return is not just our demand, it's our right, and we will not stop advocating until justice is served. And we don't want to transfer our problems, the problems of the region, to the next generation. I thank you.
Thank you, Shabnam, for your intervention and bringing up the miseries of those who have been forcibly displaced by the Azerbaijanis, by the Armenian governments. Now, this was the last speaker on our panel. The floor is open for question answer. If anybody has any question, direct to the panelists. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. I'm George Papadopoulos, Ambassador. I represent an intergovernmental organization that has observer status in the UN and other organizations. Well, thank you very much for organizing this. And it was very nice to see my old friend Mustafa, whom I missed for a number of years, and see him being active again. Now, I will start with a quote by Mustafa, who asked for the UN to play mediation, and Professor Ashraf, who said that the international community should do something. Now, as we speak, there are bilateral consultations in Saudi Arabia and something very similar in Cairo. So the multilateral scene is changing. And we notice that this transactional approach is gaining some ground. And I am wondering whether they could to the Kashmir issue. I've attended several meetings in the past in Geneva. It's an international issue, which is a satellite. It goes around the UN General Assembly, Security Council, and so forth, but there hasn't been any solution so far. So I know this is a difficult question, but what is it really the answer? Should we go through the same route again through the international institutions, or should we look at other approaches? Just some food for thought. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Ambassador Papa. Numbers by your family very well. It's also a pleasure seeing you again. And in respect to your question, I would say if bilateral negotiations between India and Pakistan do not result in a peaceful settlement of the conflict, then the other option is the one that you mentioned. So I would very much be aligned for that. And we've seen that the issue of Kashmir has remained unresolved since 1948. So I mean, this conflict cannot just go unresolved forever. So if the mediation of a third party could, in a way, facilitate a long-term solution to this, that would very much be welcome. I think one recent very good example of a protracted conflict which was solved through mediation negotiations is the example of Bougainville that held an independence referendum, I believe, in 2019, where Papua New Guinea allowed the population of Bougainville to hold a referendum. The majority of the population voted for independence, and they are now negotiating with the central authorities on how to allow Bougainville to secede from Papua New Guinea and to join the ranks of the UN. So definitely, I think this is the correct way to go.
Yes. One we can be. Thank you, moderator. Actually, I will just comment on the question, on the comment or question asked by Ambassador. The issue of Kashmir is a different issue. I think it's not the issue between two states, India and Pakistan. It's an issue where the actual party is the people of Jammu and Kashmir. And according to the UN Security Council resolutions, it's not India and Pakistan which are going to decide. It is the people of Jammu and Kashmir who are going to decide. So there are three parties to the conflict, two states and the people of Jammu and Kashmir. And if there is a negotiated settlement or a negotiation, it should be a tripartite. People should not see it as a bilateral between India and Pakistan. It's a three parties. And then you are commenting on the UN or the international institution there or any mediation. There have been mediation, there have been talks, there have been bilateral talks, there have been track 2, track 1, track 1.5. The actual problem to the Kashmir dispute is that Pakistan is the area under control of Pakistan is administered by Pakistan, according to the UN Security Council resolutions. The area under Indian control are occupied by India because India went to the UN Security Council resolutions, there were resolutions, and then they changed their stance that this is an integral part of India. The issue is that Indians do not agree with the Security Council resolutions. They do not agree giving people right of vote to decide their future. Though that's the largest democracy in the world.
Thank you, Sardar.
Thank you, Moderator. I'm just a question from Mr. Mustafa. Did you think that the semester introduction of foreign nationals into the field of camps is a clear evidence of Algeria's manipulation of demographics to inflate the number of supposed refugees and maintaining the conflict? This deliberate tactic serves to obstruct any credible census, as Algeria fears that an official headcount will expose the real and much smaller number of Sahrawis in the camps. By rejecting the UN supervised census, Algeria is not only violates international norms, but also perpetuates the suffering of the camp's inhabitants, using them as a political pawn in fabricated conflicts. Thank you, Sir.
Yeah, let me. So to the first observation that was made by the gentleman in the audience, I think it's a very valid point. Honestly, the people of Jammu Kashmir not really know it. That is why I referred to Security Council 7 that calls for the holding of a referendum. And I believe that the outcome of the referendum has to respect the language that is contained within the 1970 Friendly Relations Declaration that decides the modes of exercising the right to self-determination. Let me just allow to mention it. It says that there are three outcomes. It's the establishment of a sovereign and independent state. So obviously, if the people of Jammu and Kashmir would like to establish its own state, that should definitely be an outcome. It's the free association or integration with an independent state, or the emergence into any other political status freely determined by people. So these are the three most. So I think your observation is very much in line also with my viewpoint, but do not just ignore the role of Pakistan and India. They're heavily involved in this conflict, and there's been numerous wars that have been fought between both countries. So just to ignore that, just to assume that the people of Jammu and Kashmir can have their own say without having the eventual support from India and Pakistan, I think is unfortunately wishful. Now, in respect to the second observation, this was regarding Western Sahara and Algeria. Unfortunately, I'm not an expert on this, and I would like to decline to comment on it because I don't want to say something which is inaccurate or incorrect. But this is certainly a subject which has also remained protracted, has remained on the agenda of the UN for a very long time. And I hope that one day the political situation in Kashmir will be resolved to the interest of the Sahrawi.
Thank you.